Hi, I'm Mario Hernandez. Today I'm going to be doing a approximately 10-minute video project for my English literature class on Jack London's To Build a Fire. I'm basically just going to go around the woods and show you guys how you need to be able to be aware of your surroundings and show you a couple tips and tricks while being out in the woods. Okay, so one thing to consider for this video is that in comparison to Jack London's To Build a Fire novel, the main character was in negative 40-degree temperature traveling at night in Alaska with a dog. I don't unfortunately have a dog that could come out here with me, and we live in Alabama to where we typically have heat a lot more than we have colds. So with this video, we're going to be focusing primarily on dehydration and heat casualty rather than cold casualty like in To Build a Fire. I will be covering how troubling it can be to build a fire specifically, but throughout this video it's just going over tips and tricks on how the main character messed up and what you could do to avoid those poor decisions when getting from point A to point B out in the wilderness. Okay, so some key points to make with Jack London's To Build a Fire that our main character did was he ignored the recommendations from the local people in the village that he was leaving. One being that you should never travel alone, especially in dark, negative 40-degree weather. This also applies even for traveling in general. You should always have at least one extra person with you in case you get hurt or anything you can get taken care of, and that's unfortunately the case with what happened with our main character. He gradually made one bad move after another, and because of the cold weather, whenever he stepped into the creek, he ended up getting hypothermia and lost feeling in his legs and his feet, so he could no longer build a fire, which is what we see with our main point of the title, To Build a Fire, how challenging it can be when you're by yourself. People may believe that they have what they need in order for them to do what they got to do, but one thing everyone really has to understand is that when you're out here in the wilds, it's fair game for anything. And so, first rule and points, never travel alone, have a plan as your second point, and third is to have common sense. So another point to consider for our main character, we all know hypothermia is what killed the narrator. Another really important danger that he had to consider was also dehydration. Even in cold weather, you still have to consider dehydration as a factor, because your body, not only in hot temperatures where you're sweating out all your fluids and you have to replenish them, the same goes in an alternate point for in cold weather. Because your body's shivering, fighting to deal with the stresses of the harsh elements to stay warm, it also causes a lot of energy to get lost, and that's why you have to drink water even during in cold weather. So for here in the hot weather, we can still apply that danger to this video. And so we see here we have all this water that we could think is safe to drink, but not necessarily. And usually, if that's the case, if you run across your only water source here, if you don't have your own water source to begin with, say, for example, in my equipment, I have this CamelBak here, which has a giant pouch of up to 3 liters of water. Or if you want to be a little bit more outdoorsy and a little bit more braver, for emergency use, you could use something like this, a little portable water purification apparatus, little tool. And you can use this to safely drink out of most of the water here, so long as there's not any chemicals from any factories or anything that might have, left any residue to make it harmful to drink. So with our danger that we're going to have in this video is basically how to avoid dehydration on top of To Build a Fire itself. Okay, so it seems we've run into a water obstacle. Basically what a water obstacle is simply what it states. water is being an obstacle on your route of maneuver. Now, this is what was the deadliest error on our main protagonist in To Build a Fire. He accidentally ran into some water, and the water quickly drained a lot of the thermal energy out of his feet, to where he ended up quickly losing body temperature, and he had to start a fire in order for him to be able to try to regain the blood circulation back in his feet. Because us as bipedal humans, without our feet, we're basically screwed. And granted, you won't lose your body temperature out here in this kind of hot weather like we're in right now. But one very important thing that can happen is, say if I walked across this pond, right, or this little stream, my feet would be obviously wet, but it would easily cause for a lot of chafing, which could cause a lot of foot injuries and possibly even infection, depending on, you know, the water quality and how long it takes for me to dry my feet out. So a big rule of thumb to always have whenever you're traveling, and likely there's going to be water obstacles during your path, it's always best to have an extra pair of socks. And if you do not have extra clothing with you, or even a towel, definitely want to start a fire, or take your feet, or take your boots and your socks off and let them dry out in the sun for a bit, or put them by the fire and let them, you know, dry out, so that way you can use them again. Okay, so for your water obstacles, let's say you can't take a detour and you have to go across. The first thing you should always consider is to make sure that you find the closest, shortest route possible, and also the most shallow. And whenever you do find that spot, you want to have a stick with you, such as this one. The reason you want to have a stick with you is because you can use this to measure how deep the water is going to drop into, along with deterring any wildlife that you may run across that's hiding under there, whether it be alligators, snapping turtles, or even snakes. And here I'm going to demonstrate to you what that's going to look like, and then afterwards I'll show you what I was talking about earlier on drying off your feet, your socks, and your pants. So let's get to it. So I'm taking every step possible, and I'm going stabbing into it for each step I take. Make sure it doesn't get too deep. And there we have it. Let's keep going. So I've crossed through the water just like our protagonist. So technically, I'm in the same situation as him. My feet are soaking wet. My feet are actually a lot cooler, although not to the extent of his situation. Although, like I said previously, I cannot travel too far with wet feet because my skin is going to get so moist and loose that it's going to be easier for me to chafe and start having burn marks or friction marks on my soles. So I have to go and start a fire and get these to dry off, change my socks if possible, and go from there. Okay, so now we've finally reached our main points of not only this video, but also of our story and To Build a Fire, which is what we're going to do right now. And with our main character, his situation was, and this is what led to his ultimate downfall, beyond all of the already poor decisions he made, was his failure to create a fire on the first attempt. When you're in the wintertime, obviously your vegetation is moist, wet. It's hard for a fire to retain or even be made, just because you can't necessarily light anything that's wet. However, thankfully for our situation, the environment we're in, a lot of this vegetation we see here is dead. So like these leaves, there's no moisture left inside of them, especially with our tinder that we have here. This is what we're going to use to initiate the fire. And then we have our twigs, and this pile is what we're going to use to maintain that fire. And I have with me here is a couple of matches. This is from an MRE. They're really simple and they're easy to mess up with. And with our character, he had a lot of problems himself lighting these up, trying to fight against the winds, the cold weather itself, and then finding is really just finding vegetation that doesn't have any moisture on it. But we have an abundance of that here, so we're grateful for that. So here I'm gonna go and set it up. What we have here, you wanna make sure whenever you're making a fire, you've got a nice little dirt mound surrounding the area, that way the fire doesn't spread. I've got my match, and we're just gonna see how troublesome this can be if you don't ignite on the first time, mainly for the winter. But here it's not too big a deal, but nevertheless, it's also a pain. So we got our match, we got it lit. All right, we got to put in there. And see, we've got our fire starting right now. And as we see how fast with this tinder, how it burns really quick, while it burns, this is the perfect opportunity to go and put your twigs on there. And like I said, the twigs are what's going to allow us to retain the fire. It looks like it's dying out right now, but the more we add to it, just gently, it'll be stabilized. And so now we're going to take our boots. I'm going to take my boots off and dry my feet, and we'll go from there. Okay, so now I have my boots, my socks off, hanging around here by the fire. One thing to always consider whenever you are making a fire is that once you get this thing started, it's not just done there. You have to continuously feed it as you go through it. And you always want to make sure that you keep a good eye on your socks and boots. You want to make sure they catch on fire. You see how they're smoking a little bit right now. You're going to make sure you flip them over on each side, try to balance out the dryness. That when you put these things on, it's not only some certain spots that are dry. And on top of that, with our main protagonist from the story, he had a little bit of food with him to fill up his calorie intake and replenish his energy, which is also a very important aspect of going out in the wilderness. And what I have here with me is nothing necessarily that you have to warm up or anything like that. It's something that's easily eaten directly out of the pouch. Nothing too crazy. It's just a little beef sandwich or barbecue. And trying to get this fire going. You want to make sure you also flip your boots on the opposite side as well. Oh, you get them nice and dry. This is the goal that our main character was trying to do. But thankfully, in our situation, we were successful in doing so. Well, I really do appreciate y'all watching this video, and I thank you once again. And this is Mario Hernandez signing off. Thank you.